The founder's son told me my military contacts were not a real network. I had the personal cell number of every base commander east of the Mississippi, not their office lines, not their executive assistants, not some shared government directory you can pull off a database. Their personal cell phones. The ones they answer at 0300 when a pipe bursts in a barracks and 400 enlisted men don't have running water. The ones they pick up on a Sunday when a congressional delegation lands in 9 hours and the base looks like it survived a hurricane. I earned every single one of those numbers. One handshake, one emergency, one 3 a.m. phone call at a time over 28 years. But Blake Henning, 26 years old, 5 months out of Columbia Business School, looked at his MacBook screen instead of my face and told me those relationships were legacy drag. That was Tuesday, 10:15 a.m. Let me back up. My name is Franklin Pryor. I'm 49 years old. I spent 12 years in the United States Navy. Enlisted in 1993. Made Chief Petty Officer, E7, specializing in facilities and logistics. I know what it takes to keep a military installation running because I spent over a decade doing it with my own hands. I've crawled through ductwork in August heat in North Carolina. I've repaired industrial HVAC units at Fort Bragg, back before they renamed it Fort Liberty, in the middle of the night with nothing but a flashlight and a leather man. I've managed waste systems, electrical grids, plumbing infrastructure, the stuff nobody thinks about until it stops working. And when it stops working on a military base, people notice fast. After I left the Navy in 2005, I spent a few years doing private contracting work. Small jobs, government facilities, mostly. I knew the world, knew the people, knew the regulations. I was good at it. Then, in 2008, Judith Henning called me. Judith founded Sentinel Facilities Management in 1996. Built it from a 3-person janitorial outfit into a mid-size federal contractor. She was smart, tough, fair, the kind of boss who remembered your kid's name and still held you accountable when your numbers slipped. I respected her. Still do, in a way that makes what happened harder to talk about. She called because Sentinel's federal division was bleeding. They'd lost 2 installation contracts in 6 months. Compliance issues, response time failures. The base commanders were done. Judith told me she needed someone who spoke their language. Someone who understood that government contracting wasn't about slick proposals and PowerPoint decks. It was about trust. About showing up. I took the job. Director of Government Relations. And over the next 16 years, I rebuilt that division from the foundation up. I personally won and maintained contracts across 34 military installations. 34. Annual revenue of $195 million. Not because I had a magic formula, because I answered the phone every time. Because when Colonel Thomas Scott at Fort Liberty called at 2:47 a.m. on a Wednesday because a water main broke under Building 9, I didn't send an email. I drove there, 3 hours each way, fixed the coordination myself, had a crew on site before sunrise, and was back at my desk by noon with a status report Judith never had to ask for. That's how you build a network. Not with LinkedIn posts, not with algorithms. You build it by being the man who shows up. I missed a lot building that network. My son Benjamin is 21 now, senior at Texas A and M, smart kid. Tougher than he knows. He had to be. His mother, Sarah, my wife, she died 4 years ago. Breast cancer. Diagnosed, treated, came back, and then she was gone. 14 months from the second diagnosis to the funeral. I was there for as much of it as I could be. But there were nights I was in North Carolina fixing an HVAC system at 3 a.m. while Sarah sat through chemo alone because I couldn't lose the Fort Liberty contract. Benjamin drove her. He was 17. I think about that sometimes. My 17-year-old son driving his mother to chemotherapy because his father was crawling through ductwork on a military base 800 miles away. I told myself it was for them. The paycheck, the insurance, the stability. And it was. But the truth is, I also loved the work. I was good at it. And the people I worked with, the commanders, the base operations officers, the maintenance chiefs, they counted on me. I couldn't let them down either. After Sarah passed, I threw myself into it even harder. Benjamin understood. Or at least he said he did. I missed his baseball games through high school. I missed his move-in day at Texas A&M. I told myself I'd make it up to him. 16 years, 34 installations, $195 million in annual revenue. Every single relationship in that federal portfolio ran through one person. Me. And here's the thing about that. I knew it. Judith knew it. And back in 2014, when a competitor tried to poach me with a 40% raise and a VP title, Judith knew she had to put something real on paper to keep me. So she brought in outside counsel. We negotiated what they called the Retention and Equity Agreement. It covered compensation, commission structure, intellectual property, the works. Judith signed it herself. Wet ink, corporate seal, notarized. The original went into a physical safety deposit box at First National. Most of it was standard. Commission rate of 2.5% of gross federal contract revenue. Non-compete. Non-solicitation. The usual handcuffs. But buried in that agreement, Section 14C was a clause my attorney insisted on. My attorney being Grant Miller, 50 years old, IP and contract lawyer, and the man who slept 4 feet away from me on the USS Eisenhower for 2 deployments. Grant didn't trust corporate promises. He trusted paper. Section 14C was titled Automatic Reversion of Restrictive Covenants. In plain English, it said this: if Sentinel terminated me without cause, defined as anything other than a felony conviction or documented gross negligence, then my non-compete and non-solicitation agreements would be nullified. Completely. Automatically. After a 24-hour cure period. 24 hours. That's all the time Sentinel had to realize their mistake and reverse the termination before every restriction on me vanished like smoke. Grant called it the insurance policy. I called it common sense. If they didn't want me, they didn't get to keep me in a cage either. Judith signed it. I don't think she ever imagined it would matter. Neither did I. That was 2014. For the next 10 years, everything worked. I brought in contracts. I maintained relationships. I kept the federal division running like a machine. Judith and I had an understanding built on mutual respect and a shared belief that in government work, your word is your bond. Then, 5 months ago, Blake showed up. Blake Henning, 26 years old, Judith's son, fresh out of Columbia Business School with a degree he mentioned in every conversation and experience he could fit on a Post-it note. Judith appointed him Executive Vice President of Strategic Growth. He'd spent 5 months as a strategic advisor at a consulting firm in Manhattan, which as far as I could tell meant he'd made PowerPoint slides about companies other people actually ran. He walked into Sentinel like he was liberating it. New office, glass-walled, corner of the building, looked out over the parking lot like it was a view of Central Park. MacBook Pro on a standing desk. AirPods in during meetings. First week, he sent a company-wide email about cultural transformation and disruptive synergy. Second week, he reorganized the org chart without telling anyone. Third week, he started calling the federal division Government 1.0 and talking about his vision for Government 2.0, which, near as I could tell, meant replacing phone calls with an app. I tried. I sat with him for an hour in his glass office, explained how the contracts worked, how the relationships functioned, why Colonel Scott at Fort Liberty needed a human being on the other end of the line at all hours. Blake nodded. The way people nod when they're waiting for you to stop talking so they can say what they were already going to say. Franklin, I appreciate the history lesson, he said, those manicured fingers tapping his desk. but we need scalable solutions. Agile, not one guy with a Rolodex. The smell of overpriced cologne and new furniture. That's what I remember about his office. Not old leather, not coffee. Cologne and laminate. 4 months later, Tuesday morning, 10:15 a.m., I was called into that glass office. Blake sat behind his standing desk, which he'd lowered to sitting height, eyes on his MacBook. An HR rep named Karen stood behind him, holding a tablet, not making eye contact. Like she was watching someone walk a plank and didn't want to see the splash. Blake didn't look up, not once. Franklin, we're restructuring the government relations function to align with our new strategic direction. Your position is being eliminated, effective immediately. We're prepared to offer a standard severance package. He slid a folder across the desk. Manila. I could see the word termination on the tab. This isn't personal, he said, still looking at his screen. It's about optimization. We need people who are agile, adaptable, fresh perspectives, new energy. He said the words like he'd rehearsed them in a mirror. I didn't move. Franklin, you're legacy drag. We're moving to government 2.0. And frankly, you're just old infrastructure. Old infrastructure. The man who built every federal relationship this company has. Old infrastructure. I picked up the folder, stood up, and that's when I heard it. The door hadn't fully closed behind Karen when she stepped into the hallway. Blake's voice carried. It always carried. He was the kind of person who talked loud because he thought volume was the same thing as authority. He's got a mortgage and a kid in college. He'll fall in line and take the severance. He's got nowhere else to go. I stood in that hallway for exactly 4 seconds, listening to a 26-year-old who had never crawled through a ventilation shaft, never sat with a grieving widow at a chemo clinic, never answered a phone at 3 a.m. in his life, explain to the HR rep why I was trapped. Something shifted in me. Not anger. Something quieter, colder, like a switch flipping in a circuit breaker. Not off. On. I walked back to my desk. I placed my work phone in the center drawer. I picked up the one photo I kept there, Benjamin at his high school graduation, and put it in my jacket pocket. I left the building with the manila folder under my arm and my personal cell phone in my hand. I drove to the parking garage across the street, sat in my truck, rain hitting the windshield. I opened the folder and read every page. Standard separation agreement, 12 weeks of severance, a non-disparagement clause, and a line requiring me to reaffirm the non-compete and non-solicitation provisions from my original employment agreement. I read that line 3 times. Then I closed the folder, set it on the passenger seat, and I called Grant Miller. He picked up on the second ring. They did it, I said. 2 seconds of silence. Without cause? Without cause. Don't sign anything, Franklin. Not a single page. I know. Section 14C is active. 24 hours. If they don't reverse it by 10:15 a.m. tomorrow, every restriction evaporates. You're a free man. I sat in that parking garage for a long time. Rain on the windshield. The manila folder on the seat beside me. My personal phone in my hand. The one with 34 base commanders' numbers saved in it. I didn't sign anything. I understand perfectly. That's what I told Blake. And I meant it. I understood perfectly. He just didn't know what I understood. If you've ever had a boss or been in a situation like this, hit that like button and subscribe. I drove home that Tuesday afternoon and did something I hadn't done in 16 years. Nothing. I sat at my kitchen table with the manila folder still sealed, still unsigned, and I watched the clock on the microwave. Green numbers ticking forward. Every minute that passed was a minute Sentinel wasn't calling. Every minute was a minute closer to 10:15 a.m. Wednesday. At 6:47 p.m., my personal phone buzzed. Benjamin. Dad, you're calling me on a Tuesday night? What's wrong? Nothing's wrong. You busy this weekend? Silence. The kid knew me too well. I don't call on weekdays unless someone's dead or a pipe burst. Dad, I got let go today, Ben. More silence. Then quietly. Are you okay? I'm fine. Are you busy this weekend? I've got a paper due Monday, but I was thinking Lake Conroe. The cabin. Bring your rod. He paused. I could hear him doing the math. His father, who hadn't taken a voluntary day off since his mother's funeral, was asking to go fishing on a Friday. Yeah, Dad. I'll be there. I hung up, poured 3 fingers of Blanton's from the bottle Sarah gave me the Christmas before her diagnosis. The good stuff, not the daily drinker. I sat on the back deck with Rex, my yellow lab, his chin on my boot, and I watched the sky go dark over the tree line. I didn't check my work email. I didn't have a work email anymore. I'd left the work phone in my desk drawer at Sentinel. The only phone I had was the one that mattered. The personal cell. The one with 34 base commanders programmed into it. At 10:14 a.m. Wednesday morning, I was sitting in Grant Miller's office in downtown Houston. Leather chair, old coffee, a framed photo of the Eisenhower on the wall behind his desk. Grant had his reading glasses on, the original 2014 Retention and Equity Agreement open in front of him, the physical copy from the safety deposit box at First National. Judith Henning's wet ink signature, corporate seal, notarized. Grant looked at his watch. 10:15, he said. I nodded. They didn't call. No. Grant closed the document carefully, like he was handling something holy. Section 14C is now fully active. Your non-compete is void. Your non-solicitation is void. As of this moment, you are legally free to contact any client, any installation, any government entity you've ever worked with. Sentinel has no claim. He leaned back. They also owe you $4.875 million in accrued commissions, 2.5% of gross federal contract revenue. That's in Section 8A. Termination without cause doesn't extinguish earned compensation. They probably don't know that either. They didn't read the contract, I said. No, they didn't. Grant pulled a certified letter from his printer tray. Already typed. Already addressed to Sentinel's general counsel, a man named Philip Caldwell. The letter stated 3 things: that my termination met the contractual definition of without cause. That Section 14C had activated upon expiration of the 24-hour cure period, and that all restrictive covenants were now null and void per the terms Judith Henning herself had signed. Certified mail. Return receipt requested. Grant signed it as my attorney of record. I signed below him. He slid it into the envelope and sealed it. Philip Caldwell's going to need a stiff drink when he reads this, Grant said. He's going to need more than one. The letter went out Wednesday afternoon. Sentinel received it Thursday morning at 9:22 a.m. I know the exact time because Grant tracked the certified receipt. I was at Lake Conroe by then. Benjamin and I had driven up Friday morning. He was casting off the dock, and I was sitting in a folding chair with black coffee and my phone on the armrest. Rex was asleep at my feet. It was the first time in 4 years I'd heard Benjamin laugh the way he used to. Before Sarah, before everything got heavy, he caught a largemouth bass that was maybe 2 pounds and held it up like it was a trophy marlin, grinning with his mother's grin, and something in my chest unlocked that I didn't know had been closed. You seem different this week, he said Saturday morning over eggs. Less stressed. Like you're actually here when you're here. I am here. Are you going to be okay? With the job thing? I'm going to be fine, Ben. He looked at me the way Sarah used to, searching, deciding whether to believe me. Then he nodded. Okay. I meant it. I was going to be fine. Because while I was catching fish with my son, Grant Miller was filing incorporation papers for Prior Services Group, LLC. Federal Contractor Registration. SAM.gov profile. DUNS number. Everything by the book. I wasn't building a revenge plan. I was building a company. Back at Sentinel, the clock was already ticking. They just didn't know it yet. 14 days after my termination, the first domino fell. Fort Liberty. The big one. $23 million annual contract. Renewal deadline. Colonel Thomas Scott, 54 years old, base commander, a man I'd known for 11 years, a man whose personal cell I'd answered at 300 more times than I could count, sent Sentinel's government relations team a standard renewal inquiry. Nothing unusual, just a form letter requesting a meeting to discuss terms for the next fiscal year. Blake Henning decided to handle it personally. I know this because Stacy Wright, 42, operations manager at Sentinel, and one of the few people there with any sense left, texted me that evening. Blake took the Fort Liberty call himself. Spent 40 minutes talking about an app. Colonel Scott asked who was replacing you. Blake said the platform replaces the person. Dead silence on the line. I read that text twice. Set the phone down. Stacy sent a second message. Scott hung up. Didn't schedule the renewal meeting. Colonel Thomas Scott was not a man who suffered fools. He'd commanded 3 installations over his career. He'd done 2 combat deployments. He'd once told me, over black coffee in his office at 5 a.m., that the only thing he valued more than competence was consistency. Franklin, I don't need a vendor, he'd said. I need someone who answers the phone when something breaks. That's it. That's the whole job. Blake Henning had just told a decorated Army colonel that a platform replaces a person. The Fort Liberty contract lapsed. $23 million. Gone. Within a week, Stacy was texting me every other day. Each message was shorter than the last. More urgent. Camp Lejeune didn't renew. Blake sent a junior account rep they'd never met. Fort Stewart, same thing. Colonel Davis asked for you specifically. They told him you were no longer with the company. He said, then neither are we. 3 more this week. Fort Jackson, Fort Eisenhower, Joint Base, Langley Eustis. All declined. The pattern was always the same. Base commander requests contact with Franklin Pryor. Sentinel informs them Franklin is no longer employed. Commander declines to renew. They weren't following a company. They were following a man. And the man was gone. By the end of month 1, Sentinel had lost 9 installation contracts, $51 million in annual revenue. Blake called an all-hands meeting and used the phrase temporary market correction 14 times. He blamed bureaucratic inertia in the DoD procurement cycle. He said the word pivot so many times that Stacy told me 2 engineers in the back row started a tally on a napkin. 23. He said pivot 23 times in one meeting. By month 2, the number was 15 lost contracts. $89 million. Blake hired a consulting firm out of Washington, a boutique outfit that specialized in government digital engagement strategy. They charged Sentinel $340,000 for a report that recommended, among other things, leveraging AI-powered stakeholder mapping to optimize relationship density. Relationship density for military base commanders who wanted a human being to answer a phone at 3 a.m. The consultants lasted 6 weeks before Judith pulled the plug. By month 3, 22 contracts gone. $142 million in annual revenue evaporated. Sentinel's federal division was hemorrhaging. The phones at headquarters were ringing constantly, but they were the wrong calls. Vendors wanting payment. Subcontractors asking about delayed invoices. Insurance carriers requesting updated contract portfolios that no longer existed. And somewhere in the middle of all of it, the base commanders started calling a different number. Not Sentinel's main line. Not Blake Henning's office. Not the Government 2.0 platform. My personal cell. The first call came from Colonel Scott at Fort Liberty. Tuesday, 7:14 p.m. Franklin, I don't know what happened over there, and frankly, I don't care. I need someone to manage this installation's facilities contract. Are you in business? I am. Good. Send me a proposal. The second call came Wednesday morning. Fort Stewart, then Fort Jackson, then Langley Eustis, one after another. Commanders I'd worked with for years. Men and women who knew that when they called my number, I picked up. Every time. By the end of month 3, Prior Services Group had received formal requests for proposals from 19 military installations. 19. I was working out of my kitchen table, Benjamin helping me format documents on weekends, Grant Miller reviewing every contract. Back at Sentinel, 27 of 34 installation contracts had now either lapsed or been formally declined for renewal. $195 million in annual revenue reduced to a bleeding stump. A 61% revenue drop. The board was asking questions Judith couldn't answer. The general counsel, Philip Caldwell, had finally read Grant's certified letter. All of it. Stacy sent me one last text at the end of month 4. Just 2 words. Board meeting. That same week, my phone rang 42 times. Sentinel's main number, Blake's direct line, Judith's personal cell, Philip Caldwell's office. 42 missed calls. I didn't answer a single one. Then, on a Monday morning, at the start of month 5, a letter arrived at my kitchen table. Not a text. Not an email. A letter. Cream-colored envelope, Sentinel Facilities Management embossed in navy blue on the flap. Hand-delivered by courier. I signed for it at 8:03 a.m., with Rex nosing at the courier's shoes. I opened it standing at the counter with black coffee going cold in my hand. It was from Judith Henning. Not from legal, not from the board. From Judith personally, handwritten. 3 paragraphs. The first 2 were corporate language dressed up in cursive. The third was 1 sentence. Franklin, I am asking you to come to the table. Tuesday, 9 a.m. The boardroom. Not as an employee, not as a terminated asset. The letter made that clear. I was being invited as the owner and principal of Prior Services Group, LLC, a competing federal contractor who now held active proposals with 19 of the 34 installations Sentinel had once owned. I set the letter on the counter, poured the cold coffee down the drain, and made a fresh cup. Then I called Grant Miller. Got the invitation, I said. So did I. Philip Caldwell called my office Friday. He sounded like a man reading his own autopsy report. What did he say? He said Judith wants to discuss a resolution. I told him we'd be there, but only with full board present. Every member. No sidebar with Blake in a hallway. And he agreed in 4 seconds. That tells you everything. Tuesday morning, 9 a.m. 5 months and 1 day since Blake Henning looked at his MacBook instead of my face and called me old infrastructure. The Sentinel boardroom was exactly as I remembered it. Polished mahogany table, 20 feet long, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Houston, frosted glass doors, 8 leather chairs on each side, the smell of old coffee, and something else, something new. Fear. I walked in at 8:58 a.m. gray suit. The silver pen Judith had given me in 2010, the one engraved with my initials, clipped inside my jacket pocket. A leather portfolio under my arm with every document Grant and I had prepared. Rex was in the truck. Benjamin had driven down from College Station the night before. He was waiting at the house. Grant walked in beside me. 2 men. No entourage. No consultants. No AI-powered stakeholder mapping. The board was already seated. 8 members. I knew every face. Walter Fleming, the longest-serving director, 71 years old, the man who'd shaken my hand at my 10th anniversary dinner and told me Sentinel wouldn't exist without me. Margaret Ashworth, the audit committee chair, reading glasses perched on her nose, a legal pad already covered in notes. The rest of them, faces I'd presented to Quarterly for a decade and a half. They all looked at me when I came through the door. Not one of them looked away. Judith sat at the head of the table. 68 years old. She looked like she'd aged 5 years in 5 months. Her hands were flat on the table. No rings. No pen. Just her hands. She met my eyes for exactly 1 second, then looked down. Philip Caldwell, the general counsel, sat to her left with a stack of documents 3 inches thick. His face had the particular gray color of a man who has spent 4 months explaining to a board of directors how a 26-year-old with a Columbia MBA managed to detonate $195 million in annual revenue. And Blake. Blake Henning sat 2 chairs down from his mother. He'd traded the AirPods for a suit that didn't fit right through the shoulders. His hair was still perfectly styled. His manicured fingers were wrapped around a pen he wasn't writing with. He looked at me when I walked in, and for the first time in 5 months, he actually saw me. I sat down across from him. Grant took the chair to my right. Judith spoke first. Her voice was steady, but I'd known her for 16 years. I could hear the fracture underneath. Franklin, thank you for coming. I want to begin by acknowledging that mistakes were made in how your departure was handled. Mistakes, Blake said under his breath, just loud enough. Judith's jaw tightened. She didn't look at her son. I've asked Philip to walk the board through the current legal and contractual landscape so that everyone in this room understands exactly where we stand. Philip Caldwell stood. He opened the top folder from his stack. His hands were not steady. He cleared his throat once, then again, and began. On the date of Mr. Pryor's termination, which occurred on a Tuesday at 10:15 a.m., Sentinel initiated an involuntary separation without cause. Mr. Pryor's personnel file contains no documentation of performance deficiencies, disciplinary actions, policy violations, or any conduct meeting the contractual definition of gross negligence or felony conviction. The termination was classified internally as a strategic restructuring. He paused, turned a page. Mr. Pryor's 2014 Retention and Equity Agreement, signed by Mrs. Henning and bearing the corporate seal, contains a provision at Section 14C titled Automatic Reversion of Restrictive Covenants. This provision states that in the event of involuntary termination without cause, all non-compete and non-solicitation restrictions shall be nullified automatically within 24 hours of formal notice, unless the termination is reversed within that cure period. The room was silent. Walter Fleming had stopped writing. Margaret Ashworth's pen was motionless over her legal pad. Philip continued. His voice had gone flat, reading it like a verdict. The termination was not reversed within the 24-hour window. Section 14C activated at 10:15 a.m. the following Wednesday. At that moment, Mr. Pryor became legally free to contact any client, solicit any contract, and compete directly with Sentinel in the federal facilities management space. He had no restrictions. None. Blake shifted in his chair. This is a clerical oversight. One clause in a 10-year-old contract doesn't... Blake! Judith's voice cut the air like a blade laid flat on glass. He stopped. Philip Caldwell turned to the second document. Additionally, Section 8A of the same agreement establishes a commission rate of 2.5% of gross federal contract revenue for all contracts originated or maintained by Mr. Pryor. At the time of termination, Mr. Pryor's accrued and unpaid commission totaled $4.875 million. Termination without cause does not extinguish earned compensation under the terms Mrs. Henning signed. Margaret Ashworth spoke for the first time. Philip, are you telling this board that we owe Mr. Pryor nearly $5 million, and we also handed him the legal right to take our entire federal portfolio? Philip closed the folder, set both hands on the table. Yes. Silence. The kind that has weight. Blake leaned forward. This is absurd. He's one guy. He doesn't have the infrastructure, the staff, Blake. This time it was Walter Fleming, 71 years old, voice like gravel. Mr. Pryor currently holds active proposals with 19 military installations that were formerly our clients. His firm, Pryor Services Group, is registered, bonded, and SAM certified. Colonel Scott at Fort Liberty signed a letter of intent with Mr. Pryor's firm 3 weeks ago. I confirmed this with the colonel myself. Personally, Fleming looked at Blake the way a man looks at a stain on a good shirt. You didn't take our infrastructure, son. You fired it. Blake's face drained of color. Not slowly. All at once. Like someone pulled a plug. I hadn't said a word. Not one. I sat with my hands folded over the leather portfolio and let the room do what the room was going to do. Judith turned to me. Franklin. Judith. What do you want? I opened the portfolio, slid a single document across the mahogany. Grant's letterhead, Pryor Services Group, a proposed settlement and transition framework. Every number specific, every clause clean. I want what I'm owed, I said. Section 8, A, $4.875 million in accrued commissions, settled at $4.8 million with a mutual release. And I want Sentinel to formally acknowledge the activation of Section 14C. In writing, filed with your corporate records. And your firm? Judith asked. Pryor Services Group is operational. 19 active proposals, 12 signed letters of intent, first year projected revenue of $110 million. I'm not here to destroy Sentinel, Judith. I'm here because your son told me the network was a database. I looked at Blake. First time I'd spoken directly to him since the day he fired me. You thought the network was the database, Blake. The network is the man who answers the phone at 0300. He opened his mouth, nothing came out. Judith closed her eyes for 3 seconds. When she opened them, she looked at her son with something worse than anger. Exhaustion. Blake, your employment with Sentinel Facilities Management is terminated effective immediately. Please collect your personal belongings. Security will escort you. Blake's chair scraped back. Mom, you can't. I can, and I should have done it 4 months ago. She turned to the board. I move to approve the settlement as proposed by Mr. Pryor. $4.8 million. Full acknowledgement of Section 14C. All in favor. 8 hands went up. Everyone. 8-0. Blake stood in the doorway of that boardroom for 4 seconds. The same amount of time I'd stood in the hallway outside his glass office 5 months earlier, listening to him explain why I was trapped. He looked at his mother. He looked at the board. He looked at me. I didn't look away. I didn't smile. I didn't say a word. The same security guard who had watched me clean out my desk walked Blake Henning to the elevator. I heard the doors close from the boardroom. Click. Judith and I spoke for another 40 minutes. Professional. Measured. She apologized once, and it was real. I accepted it, and that was real too. She'd let family cloud her judgment. She said so. I told her I understood. I let family cloud my business judgment, she said. I'm sorry, Franklin. I know. The settlement check cleared 11 days later. $4.8 million. Pryor Services Group closed its first fiscal year with $110 million in revenue across 19 military installation contracts. I hired 14 people. 3 of them came from Sentinel. Stacy Wright was the first. Sentinel's federal division reported a 61% revenue decline. They kept 7 of their original 34 contracts. Blake Henning's LinkedIn profile now lists him as founder, stealth mode startup. No details, no followers, no one asking. Last Saturday, Benjamin drove down from College Station. We sat on the back deck, the same deck where I'd sat with Rex the night I got fired. Benjamin had 2 finals left before graduation. He was telling me about a summer job offer, something in logistics, and I realized I was listening. Actually listening. Not checking a phone. Not running mental calculations on a contract renewal timeline. Just sitting in a chair with my son and my dog. 3 fingers of Blanton's on the railing, watching the sun drop behind the tree line. "Dad," he said, "you're going to come to graduation, right?" "Front row." "You don't have to sit front row." "I'm sitting front row, Ben." He laughed. Sarah's laugh, and Rex lifted his chin off my boot and looked at me the way dogs look at you when they know something has shifted. When the house feels different, quieter, settled. I took a sip of bourbon and watched the city lights start to flicker through the trees. 42 missed calls. I never returned a single one. I didn't have to. The work spoke for itself. It always had. Sometimes justice doesn't roar. It arrives quietly, with calm hands and a notarized signature. If you enjoyed this story, hit that like button and let me know what you think in the comments. And if you haven't subscribed yet, subscribe and ring that notification bell to get alerts about new stories like this one. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.